There is a silent collapse happening in modern life. You don't see it in headlines, you don't hear it in conversation, but it's everywhere. In the restless scroll through endless screens, in the shallow breath behind every forced smile, in the quiet dread that greets the morning before the alarm even sounds. We are not broken, but we are profoundly disconnected, not just from each other, but from ourselves. And that disconnection shows up in the way we live. We move fast, but feel stuck. We are surrounded by information, but starving for wisdom. We are constantly stimulated, yet emotionally numb. This isn't coincidence. It's the result of imbalance, of a life built more on reaction than reflection, of a nervous system trained to survive, not to thrive. And at the center of this imbalance is something often ignored: the chemistry of our own minds. Dopamine. You've heard the word, the so-called pleasure chemical. But it's more than that. Dopamine is not just what makes you feel good. It's what makes you feel driven. It's the molecule of motivation, of pursuit, of action. And when dopamine is imbalanced, everything starts to feel heavier. The smallest task becomes a mountain. The spark you used to carry dims. The days blur. The mind clouds. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to feel like a lesser version of who you once were. But here is what the modern world won't tell you. You don't need a pill to feel alive again. You don't need another app, another routine, or another rush of stimulation. What you need is clarity. What you need is consistency. What you need is reconnection, not to more, but to less, to the essential. This is where the Stoics come in. Because long before neuroscience, long before psychology, they knew a man's strength does not come from what he owns. It comes from what he masters, and the first thing he must master is himself. Today we begin a journey, not toward motivation, but toward meaning, not toward intensity, but toward inner rhythm, not toward chasing dopamine, but learning how to let it flow again, naturally, through the habits, disciplines, and quiet choices that build a resilient life. This is not about perfecting yourself. It's about restoring yourself. Because deep inside you, beneath the noise, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the coping, is a man who is still capable of clarity, focus, joy, and strength. He has not disappeared. He has only been buried. And now it is time to dig him out. We begin with the body. Because before you change your mindset, before you set goals, before you find meaning, you must first rebuild the vessel that carries your spirit. And that begins with the most underrated medicine on earth. Movement, but not the kind of movement the modern world demands. Not punishment, not performance, not 10,000 steps tracked, not aesthetics judged by strangers. We're talking about movement as a return, movement as a reconnection, movement as rhythm, movement as signal to your nervous system. I am still alive. I have not given up. I am returning to myself. When you move, even slowly, and when something shifts, the fog begins to lift. The breath deepens. The world once flat and gray regains shape. That is not magic. That is chemistry. That is dopamine responding to motion, not intensity, not perfection, just motion. The Stoic Cleanthes understood this centuries ago. A philosopher, a laborer. He hauled water by night and studied by day. He moved his body so his mind could stay sharp. He didn't separate the physical from the philosophical. He knew one serves the other. You don't need to believe in ancient Stoic teachings to understand this. Your own experience will confirm it. Have you ever taken a short walk and returned with a different mind? Have you ever stepped outside and felt your anxiety soften? Not disappear, but loosen its grip? That's the beginning. Not of healing the world, but of healing your own inner atmosphere. So if you feel unmotivated, numb, disconnected, don't wait for energy. Create the conditions for energy to return. Move, even slowly. Not to burn calories, but to relight your inner fire. Let the first discipline be presence. The second, movement. And the third, nourishment. Because what you feed Yourself is not just physical. It is mental, it is chemical, it is spiritual, and we'll explore that in the next part. We ended our last reflection with movement, with a return to the body, with the understanding that our inner chemistry, our dopamine, our energy, our mental clarity, begins not in theory, but in motion. But motion alone is not enough. You cannot outrun exhaustion with exercise. You cannot outlift emptiness with effort. You need something deeper, something that sustains. And that something is nourishment, not just food, but fuel. For the body, the brain, and the soul. And in the modern world, most of what we consume depletes us. Highly processed, highly addictive, highly distracting. We eat for pleasure. We snack for stimulation. We drink for escape. And we forget. Every bite, every sip, every swallow. It becomes part of us. Our blood, our chemistry, our mood. A man of Stoic philosophy knows this because he does not see eating as a moment of indulgence. He sees it as a practice of alignment. A moment to ask, am I feeding my cravings or my clarity? Seneca once said, we should eat to live, not live to eat. This is not asceticism. This is not self-denial. This is self-respect. You do not need to starve. You do not need to punish yourself. But you must begin to notice what sharpens you and what dulls you. Pay attention to how your body feels after the meal. Not just whether it tastes good in the moment, but whether your mind is clearer or heavier after. Whether your breath deepens or shortens, whether you feel energized more or enslaved. This is not about calories. This is about chemistry. Dopamine, serotonin, blood sugar, gut bacteria. These are not abstract ideas. They are your emotional foundation. A sluggish body cannot carry a papuna, sharp mind. A toxic gut cannot support a peaceful soul. So what do? Start simple. Remove the obvious poisons, ultra-processed foods, sugar-laden drinks, chemical-packed snacks that offer stimulation but rob you of energy. You do not need to become a nutrition monk. You only need to reclaim your dignity with what you choose to consume. Let your first rule be, if it depletes me, I do not need it. If it numbs me, I must question it. If it fogs my mind, it does not belong in my temple. Because the body is not a battleground. It is a vessel, and a man's vessel must be clean if he is to sail far. Once you've reclaimed movement and nourishment, the third gate opens, sleep. This is where many modern warriors fall. They push, they grind, they sacrifice rest for results, and in doing so they burn the very fuel required for any result at all. Sleep is not laziness, sleep is strategy, sleep is restoration, and without it, your dopamine system cannot function. Your discipline collapses, your memory fades, your joy becomes mechanical. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not waste time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. But how can a man be good if he is exhausted? How can he be kind if his mind is fogged? How can he reflect if his brain is drowning in fatigue?" The modern world glorifies burnout, but Stoic philosophy honors balance. Discipline, yes, but sustainable discipline. Sharpness, yes, but replenished sharpness. So how do you restore sleep? First, you protect it, as you would your most sacred meeting. Because sleep is not just rest, it is neural repair, it is memory, consolidation, it is dopamine recalibration. Second, you wind down. No man can leap from chaos into peace. You must create the conditions. Dim the lights, silence the noise, let the mind breathe. Third, you accept that being human includes needing recovery. You are not a machine. You are a system of rhythms. You perform best when you honor those rhythms. This is not weakness, this is wisdom. So we have movement, we have nourishment, we have rest. And now, we enter the most subtle realm of all, attention. Because what you place your attention on, you become. And in a world ruled by algorithms, every second of your focus is being hunted. Every scroll, every swipe, every ad, every ping, it is a battle for your mind. And the longer you drift without discipline, the more you forget who you are. But the Stoics knew, he who controls his attention controls his reality. And in the next part, we will explore how to take it back. Voiceover script Stoic philosophy for life. Keyword, Stoic philosophy. Tiep noi fan truoc, attention is no longer something we give, it's something they take, scroll by scroll, click by click, notification by notification. And the cost? Your presence, your depth, your ability to think clearly without noise clinging to your thoughts. But attention is not gone, it's just scattered. And anything that is scattered can be gathered, if you're willing to be still long enough to collect it. A man of Stoic discipline begins by noticing where his attention leaks. He doesn't judge, he observes, because awareness always comes before control. You feel it in small moments. You open your phone for one thing. 15 minutes vanish. You return, not refreshed, but dulled. This isn't failure. This is conditioning. Your mind was trained to chase novelty, but it can be retrained to seek meaning. Start with one decision. No phone for the first hour of the day. Why? Because you deserve 1 hour that belongs only to you. Not to headlines, not to other people's problems, not to algorithms that do not care about your peace. You wake, you move, you eat, you sit, and you think, not scroll, not check, not compare, but breathe and listen. The voice you're trying to hear is not out there, it's within, but it only speaks in silence, and silence must be created. Attention is not just mental, it's spiritual. It's where your life flows. So if it's scattered, so are you. You do not need to delete everything. You need to realign, create intentional space. 1 walk a day without your phone, 1 meal without a screen, 1 conversation without distraction, not because it's impressive, but because it's human. And the more human you become, the less artificial stimulation you need. That's when dopamine begins to regulate itself, not from the high of novelty, but from the rhythm of simplicity. And that rhythm leads to structure, not rigid, not obsessive, but strong. Because once you regain attention, the next step is order, not imposed by the world, designed by you. A man without structure drifts. He has no anchor, no compass. He may work, he may even succeed, but he is scattered, and scattered. Effort is forgettable, so you simplify, not to do less, but to do what matters most. You don't fill your calendar, you protect it. 1 block of time for deep work, 1 block for reflection, 1 block for stillness. That's how a Stoic builds. Not for show, for strength. Let your routines be rituals, not habits you tolerate, but acts of devotion to the life you're trying to build. Wake at a consistent time, not for discipline alone, but to tell your nervous system, I am here, I am ready, I am not lost. Eat with presence, not to chase health, but to practice respect for your body, for the day, for the energy you carry into the world. Create a cutoff, a sacred line where work ends and life begins, even if you live alone, especially then, because solitude without structure becomes chaos. You don't need more time, you need a better rhythm. And rhythm begins when you take your attention back from the world and give it to yourself. Only then can you reflect, because reflection without stillness is noise, and noise never tells the truth. Sit for 5 minutes. No music, no phone, no journal, just you. Ask one question. What did I chase today that didn't deserve me? Listen, then decide who you want to be tomorrow. That's where structure becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes transformation. You begin to realize that clarity is not found in doing more. It's found in removing what dulls you, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You remove what weakens your presence. the people who drain, the habits that numb, the conversations that go nowhere, not out of hate, but out of love, for the man you are becoming. And the more you subtract, the more you see. Not only the world, but yourself. Not the self shaped by noise, but the self that existed before you tried to prove anything. That man has been waiting. Not for applause, not for perfection, but for space to return. And now you begin to create that space. Not once, not when you're broken, but daily, like a ritual. You take 5 minutes to breathe, not to perform, but to return, to listen. What you find in those minutes is not always pleasant. There is discomfort, there is restlessness, there is the weight of everything you've avoided. But you stay, because staying is power. The man who can sit with himself, without distraction, without stimulation, that man is dangerous. Not to others, to illusions. He sees through the noise. He recognizes the false self that's been driving his actions, and he begins to ask real questions. Not, how do I get more? But why do I want more? Not how do I get attention? But what part of me still needs to be seen? Not how do I win, but what would peace actually feel like? This is where inner work begins. Not with journaling, not with affirmations, but with honesty. You don't need more motivation, you need less distraction. You don't need another morning routine. You need to keep the promises you already made. You've read the quotes, you've heard the lectures, you've watched the videos, but nothing changes until you live the philosophy, until it leaves the screen and enters your spine. You don't just read Marcus Aurelius, you become the kind of man who writes what he would have written, because you've faced your thoughts, because you've stood in your own storm and chose stillness. You realize now, discipline isn't just doing hard things. It's choosing what's right even when no one will ever know. It's walking away from chaos not because you're scared, but because you're finished. You've played the game. You've tried to prove. You've argued with the unwise. You've chased validation. And you came back empty. Now you move differently. You don't respond to every insult, because your peace is no longer for sale. You don't seek praise, because silence is louder than applause. You speak less, not out of fear, out of precision. You carry yourself like a man who answers to something higher, not society, not the crowd, but the standard within. That standard grows in silence, and silence grows with solitude. You begin to protect your alone time like a sanctuary, not because you hate people, but because you've learned something most never do, that nothing can grow in your life until it grows in you first. So you wake early, not to impress, but to sit with your soul before the world can touch it. You train not to post it, but to prove to yourself that you still choose discomfort over decay. You read not to quote, but to sharpen your inner blade, because life will test you, and you intend to be ready. And that's what this is about, not productivity, not self-help, not chasing some perfect state. This is about building a center so solid that nothing shakes it, not betrayal, not loss, not failure. You don't want easy wins anymore. You want peace that can't be taken. You want joy that doesn't come from achievement. You want strength that doesn't need to be shown to be felt. And that strength, it starts in stillness, it grows in structure, it is refined in solitude. You begin to realize clarity doesn't come from doing more. It comes from removing what dulls you, not just in the body, but in the mind and the soul. You remove what weakens your presence, the habits that numb, the conversations that go nowhere, the distractions that feel urgent but mean nothing, not out of anger, but out of respect for the man you're becoming. And the more you subtract, the more you see. Not just the world, but yourself. The self before the noise. The self before the need to prove. The self that never needed to be anything but real. That man has not disappeared, he's only been buried. Beneath urgency, beneath performance, beneath the noise of becoming what others expect. Now you begin to return, not in dramatic fashion, but quietly. Like water finding its course again, you sit in stillness, not because it's easy, but because it's the only place the truth speaks. You feel the resistance, the urge to check something, do something, escape something, but you stay, and in staying, you begin. No one will see this work. There will be no applause, no metrics, no post to prove it, but you'll know. Because something shifts, the breath deepens, the grip loosens, the pressure fades, not gone, but no longer louder than your awareness. That's where transformation begins. Not in action, but in attention. You become aware of the voice beneath the surface, the one that says, "Not this again. Don't go back there. You've been here before and it didn't serve you." And this time, you listen. You pause before the old habit. You breathe before the quick reaction. You soften before the unnecessary battle. Not because you're weak, but because you're no longer interested in wasting your power. You've carried yourself through enough storms to know that stillness is not surrender. It's strength. You wake early, not to impress anyone, but because there is something sacred about facing the day before the world can pull you off course. You train, not for appearance, but because discipline sharpens the edge that life will test. You eat clean, not for the mirror, but because clarity has a cost, and you're willing to pay it. You rest, not out of laziness, but because fatigue is not a badge. It's a warning. You keep your word, even when no one would notice if you didn't, because integrity is no longer a concept. It's who you are. And little by little, you build trust with yourself again. That's how confidence is born, not from praise, but from private victories. The kind no one claps for, the kind no one sees, the kind that makes you unshakable when the world begins to shake. You no longer need the noise that once filled the silence you used to run from. Now, it's where you go to rebuild. You stop explaining yourself, not because you have something to hide, but because you have nothing to prove and everything to live. You notice how people react differently. Some lean in, some pull away, some feel your presence, others feel their insecurity, but you remain grounded, clear, calm. You are no longer pulled by emotion. You observe it, feel it, let it pass, like wind through open hands. Nothing to hold, nothing to fight, only movement. You speak less, and when you speak, it lands. Because your words are no longer decoration, they're direction. You stop chasing potential, you start becoming it. You stop measuring progress by what others applaud. You start measuring it by what no longer controls you. You don't rise and fall with praise. You don't shrink under criticism, you stay steady. Because you've seen both, and neither owns you anymore. You make fewer decisions, but each one is sharp. Because your mind isn't scattered, it's aligned. You say no more often, not out of rejection, but out of precision. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every voice deserves your response. You protect your peace, not because it's fragile, but because it's powerful. And power, once mastered, must be guarded. This isn't perfection. This is progress. Slow, quiet, real. The kind of progress that no one can give you, and no one can take away. Because you built it yourself, with your breath, with your presence, with your refusal to break when everything around you begged you to. And you know now. Strength is not in force, it's in restraint. Not in having the last word, but in no longer needing one. Not in controlling outcomes, but in owning your responses. Not in appearing unshaken, but in choosing to stay calm when the storm arrives, and the storm always comes. That's life, but now you no longer ask it to stop. You stand and let it pass through you, because what you've built wasn't made of noise, wasn't made of approval. It was made in silence, tested in solitude, and carried in stillness, and that kind of strength doesn't crack. You stop rushing, Because you no longer believe speed is strength. You've seen what rushing leads to. Mistakes, regret, exhaustion, disconnection. You don't need to move fast anymore. You need to move right. And right takes time. Time to see clearly. Time to respond wisely, time to align. You begin to master patience. Not the passive kind, the powerful kind. The kind that waits, not because it is weak, but because it is sure. You used to force, now you allow. Not from laziness, from clarity. You plant the seed, you show up daily. You let growth do its work. Slowly, silently, deeply. The world rushes to become something. You return to who you are. You no longer chase timelines. You build lifetime practices. And that shift changes everything. You feel the weight come off your shoulders, the pressure to prove, to achieve faster, to match their pace. Gone, you've outgrown the race. Because you've realized there's nothing there for you. Your race is inward, to become solid where you used to bend, to become calm where you used to crack, to become free where you used to cling. And freedom begins with detachment, not from people, not from life, but from outcome. You act, you release, you give your best, then let go. Because you've learned. Control is a lie. Effort is yours, results are not. You let that truth settle, not as defeat, but as peace. Now you walk differently, not faster, but fuller. You're no longer trying to get somewhere. You're trying to bring something, presence, awareness, depth. You slow down. You listen longer. You speak softer. You breathe deeper. And in that rhythm, you begin to feel awake again. The fog lifts. The tension eases. The mind that once sprinted in circles now walks in straight lines. You notice the small things, the quiet between words, the space between thoughts, the moments that used to blur. You are here, fully. And the more you're here, the less you need. That's the next shift. You begin to detach from craving, not from enjoyment, but from addiction. You enjoy, but you don't chase. You experience, but you don't grasp. You feel joy, but you're not ruled by it. You feel pain, but you're not broken by it. You stop needing things to be constant, because you've accepted nothing is. You've watched your moods rise and fall. You've seen your thoughts contradict. You felt joy and emptiness in the same day, so you stop identifying with any of it. You observe, you allow, you return to center, to stillness, to the quiet core of you that does not shake when the outer world does. And you realize that's what Stoicism really is. Not armor, not detachment from life, but connection to what never leaves you. The essence beneath the roles, the silence beneath the thoughts, the truth beneath the story. You begin to sit with yourself more, not to fix, just to witness. And in that witnessing, the healing happens, because no one has ever truly seen you until you did. You don't fear the darkness anymore. You enter it, to clean it, to carry light into it. You revisit the pain, the story you never finished, the guilt you buried, the part of you that you thought disqualified you from peace. You sit with it, and you breathe through it. And slowly, it loses power. Not because it disappears, but because you no longer fight it. You understand now. Pain is not the enemy. It is the messenger, and the message is always the same. Come home to yourself. That is the call. Not to escape, but to return. And that's the journey now. Not to become someone new, but to clear away everything that isn't you. You don't add, you subtract, until all that remains is something solid, something still, something true. You stop searching for meaning in the future. You begin to see it here, in the breath you didn't rush, in the moment you didn't escape, in the decision you made, not because you had to, but because it aligned. That alignment becomes your compass. Not emotion, not pressure, not what they'll think. Only one question matters now. Does this match who I'm becoming? If not, you let it go. No drama, no delay. Just release. You stop collecting things that weigh you down. Possessions, projects, people. You declutter not just your space, but your mind, your calendar, your identity. You let go of roles that were never yours. You stop playing the part. You walk off their stage, and you return to the ground beneath your own feet. You become simple again, not small, clear, because clarity is not less. It's everything that remains after the unnecessary has been removed, and you feel it, the lightness, the peace, the way you move without dragging your past behind you. You forgive, not for them, but for you. You forgive the version of yourself who didn't know better. You forgive the mistakes, the misjudgments, the missed chances. You stop punishing the old self for not being who you are now, because that self walked the fire that made this one possible. So you nod to the past, you thank it, then you stop living in it. You return to now, where your hands still have power, where your voice still carries truth, where your next step can still shift everything, and you take that step slowly, deliberately, without pressure, because urgency is no longer your god. Integrity is. You do things right, even if they take longer, even if no one sees, even if no one claps. You sharpen your word, not to impress, to protect. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop saying no when fear is the reason. You say what needs to be said calmly, without apology, without aggression. You speak like a man who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. And people feel it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. They feel your clarity, your weight, your stillness. It disrupts them, or inspires them, or both. But you don't manage their reactions. You're too busy tending to your own alignment. You don't chase being liked, you pursue being real, and being real is messy. It means saying no to things that once defined you. It means walking alone when the crowd turns. It means letting go of parts of you that were born from survival, but cannot come with you into peace. You stop arguing with the world. You stop needing it to be different. You meet it as it is, then you meet yourself and as you are, and the work begins there. You build slow. But this time it lasts, because now, you're not building for approval. You're building for truth. You no longer fear being misunderstood, because you're no longer trying to be understood. You're trying to be whole, and wholeness is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't perform. It just is. You walk into rooms differently now, not to be noticed, but to notice. Not to speak, but to listen. Not to lead, but to serve. Because your strength no longer needs attention. It just needs direction. You have nothing to prove, you have everything to offer, and most of it will be silent. You begin to feel unshakable, not because life is easy, but because you've stopped depending on ease. You've stopped asking the world to be soft. You've trained yourself to be solid. Pain still comes, but it no longer defines you. Doubt still visits, but it no longer owns you. You meet them both, like an old friend at the door. You nod. You let them speak. Then you return to your breath, and they leave. Not because you force them out, but because they no longer find a home inside you. You've cleaned the house, burned the masks, closed the windows where noise used to crawl in. You've made space. Not for more, for meaning. You do fewer things, but with more weight, more intention, more presence. You don't multitask, you focus. One task, one breath, one clear line through the fog, and you start seeing results. Not loud ones, not overnight ones, but real ones. Your thinking sharpens, your speech slows, your habits align. You're no longer hoping things will get better. You're moving like a man who's already begun. No excuses, no waiting, no story, just action, simple, consistent, grounded. You rise before the sun, not to dominate the day, but to meet it, fully awake. You stretch, you breathe, you move, and the body remembers, I am still here. I still belong to someone disciplined. You eat, to fuel, not to escape. You rest when it's time, not when it's easy. You return to routine, not to impress, but to protect what you've built. And what you've built is different. It's not a version of you. It's you, stripped of noise, stripped of guilt, stripped of pretending. You don't negotiate with distractions. You don't make space for what steals your fire. You don't explain peace to people addicted to chaos. You carry your stillness quietly, and it rattles those who live loud, but hollow. You don't argue anymore. You don't correct the ignorant. You let them speak. You let them watch. And you keep walking because you know. Clarity needs no defense. It just needs consistency. You serve your work in silence. You pour your energy into what matters, not because you expect applause, but because you respect your time. Time. You feel its weight now, not as a threat, but as a guide. You no longer waste it on things that drain, not on gossip, not on mindless scrolling, not on proving your worth. You've already proven it to the only one who matters, yourself. That's what self-trust is. Doing what's right, even when no one knows. Especially then. It's choosing the hard path, not because you crave suffering, but because you crave something real. You're no longer seduced by comfort. You've tasted what it leads to. Dullness, regression, regret. Now you choose effort, not to punish, to honor, to stay sharp, to stay clear, to stay grounded. And grounded men, they don't need to shout. They carry presence that cannot be faked. They move with intention that doesn't waver. They speak with weight that silence respects. You've become that man, not all at once, but day by quiet day, and now, you walk into life differently. Not hoping to be rescued, but ready to respond. Not wishing for ease, but trained for impact. You're no longer interested in who's watching. You're focused on what you're building. You don't chase recognition, you chase refinement. And the deeper you go, the less you need from the surface. Less praise, less attention, less noise. Because you've tasted something greater, and once you've felt that depth, surface level will never satisfy again. You protect your time like a warrior, not out of fear of failure, but out of respect for purpose. You don't let just anything enter. Your mind, you guard it, you filter, you observe. Because you've realized, what you consume, you become. Your thoughts are no longer reactions. They're crafted, tempered, forged in quiet. You read slowly, you think deeply, you speak rarely, and when you do speak, it lands. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you're not trying at all. You've removed the need to be validated, the need to be liked, the need to be right. And in that removal, you gained power. Power over yourself. Power over impulse. Power over the old stories. You see now that most people aren't thinking. They're reacting, they're echoing, they're surviving. But you're not here to survive. You're here to evolve. And evolution, it's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's patient. It's daily. You used to want quick change. Now you want real change. You used to count days. Now you count repetitions. You show up, even when it's boring, even when it's slow, even when it's hard, especially then. Because you've learned, breakthrough is not a moment. It's a pattern, one small choice, repeated, until it becomes identity. That's what you're shaping now. Not a plan. A person. And that person doesn't need motivation. He moves from alignment. He doesn't seek permission. He lives from clarity. He doesn't try to control the outcome, he masters the process. You walk into the unknown now without fear, because you've built something within that no failure can destroy, and that's the shift. You stop fearing failure. You start fearing regret, not the kind that says I made a mistake, the kind that whispers I never tried. So you try, fully, presently, without attachment. You give your all, then you let go. You no longer demand that life bend. You bend with strength, with intention, with grace, and you don't collapse. You adjust, you adapt, you rise. Every challenge becomes training. Every setback becomes data. Every pain becomes potential. You no longer pray for ease. You pray for capacity, and you've become capable, not because you avoided storms, but because you learned to breathe inside them. You carry your storm differently now, not with noise, with poise, not with chaos, with calm, not with fear, with faith. Faith not in outcomes, but in who you've become. You've stopped chasing what's loud. You've started listening for what's lasting. You no longer trade your attention for distraction. You invest it in what deepens you. You stop giving energy to what drains. You conserve it, refine it, redirect it, and the result is presence. Not occasional presence, not forced mindfulness, real presence. The kind that walks into a room and calms it. Not with charisma, with quiet. You carry less, but you feel heavier. Not in burden, in gravity. Your words mean more now, because they're no longer given away freely. Your time is felt now, because it's no longer wasted, and your boundaries, they're no longer explained. They're lived. You don't justify your peace. You protect it. You don't argue with chaos. You exit it not out of pride, out of purpose, because your energy isn't infinite, and your direction matters more than your speed. You've outgrown urgency. You've matured past reaction. You've settled into clarity. Clarity that was hard-won. Clarity that came not from books, but from burning the old version of you. The one who chased, who needed, who broke down for things that now don't even register. You've buried that man with honor, and now you walk forward. Lighter, sharper, quieter. You're not detached. You're focused. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not hiding. You're choosing. And that difference is everything. Now you show up where you mean to. You give what you want to. You build what aligns with you. No more proving. No more performing. No more pretending. You're here, fully. And that's enough. You've replaced the need to be seen with the need to stay true. You no longer chase recognition. You chase reality. What's real? What's honest? What's quietly powerful? Because all the shouting in the world cannot compete with the quiet of a man who knows who he is. You no longer resist the silence, you return to it, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. You've learned that not every answer comes in words. Some come in stillness, in breath, in what remains when all distractions fall away. You sit with yourself now, not to fix, not to escape, but to listen. And what you hear is enough. You don't rush through discomfort. You let it teach. Because pain that's listened to becomes wisdom, and wisdom once earned becomes your compass. You no longer seek control. You embody command, not over others, over your state, over your center, over your choices. You've seen the world spin fast, but you no longer spin with it. You observe, you discern, you choose your movement with care. That care is your strength now. Your rituals are no longer rigid, they are sacred. Your mornings are no longer for catching up. They are for returning to yourself before the world lays hands on you. Your evenings are no longer for collapsing. They are for closing the day with presence, with breath, with gratitude. Gratitude not for what went perfect, but for what went real. for the strength you showed, for the lesson you gained, for the self you didn't abandon. You've made peace with being misunderstood, because you'd rather be clear with yourself than acceptable to the confused. You speak truth not to provoke, but to free. You walk alone sometimes, not because no one cares, but because you care too much to walk in the wrong direction. Your peace is no longer up for debate. Your path is no longer a negotiation. It is steady, quiet, earned. You no longer need loud declarations. Your life declares enough. Every small act, every consistent choice, every silent decision to choose alignment over approval. That's your revolution, and no one can take it from you. This is who you've become. Not perfect, but present, not invincible, but anchored, not always certain, but never lost. Because you've built something deeper than confidence. You've built self-respect, and from that soil, everything strong will grow. So now you move, not to arrive, but to express, not to chase, but to carry, not to shout, but to show that a man who's found himself needs nothing else to feel whole.